If you had to think of a perfect metaphor for how terrible people are at predicting the future, it's hard to go past this. At the time this photo was taken, this place was known as Burning Hill. Honestly, the picture's kind of hard for me to look at. Just take it down. Okay, let me explain. In 1945, Australia had 12 functioning tram networks in Adelaide, Ballarat, Bendigo, Brisbane, Geelong, Hobart, Kalgoorlie, Launceston, Newcastle, Perth, Melbourne and Sydney. In fact, Sydney's tram network was the largest in the Southern Hemisphere at the time. The city had more than 1,500 trams, carrying 404 million passengers every year. But despite this, cars became king.
The problem of traffic is common to all our cities. Hold-ups occur wherever different needs conflict.
Traffic became a serious problem in Australia's cities in the years after World War II.
Yes, mate, dynamite. That's the only way to get through.
And many people started identifying a culprit.
They block the roads, traffic just can't get past them. I think we could do without them.
So state governments everywhere but Victoria decided to dismantle their tram networks. This would make more room for cars and buses could pick up the slack. But it wasn't going to be as simple as just ripping out the tracks. In 1945, Sydney had more than 1,500 trams in service. What were they going to do with them all? Well, starting in the mid-1950s, the New South Wales Transport Department began rolling them up into the tram depot in Randwick. They would remove the motors and wheels, then drag them up onto a hill. There, they tipped engine oil from a nearby bus depot onto the floor of the tram and lit them on fire. Stood back to watch them burn. Up to 15 trams at a time were burned right there on that hill in Randwick. You can see their husks in aerial photos taken at the time. By 1970, Australia had gone from 12 tram networks to 1. 55 years later, and there is work underway to build new networks in 6 cities at eye-watering cost. Can you possibly think of a better example of how terrible we are at predicting the future than that? And that's what this show is all about, how bad we are at predicting the future. Decades ago, we shackled ourselves to oil-based energy sources.
Drill, baby, drill.
And now, instead of getting us moving, it's left us trapped in place. I'm Matt Bevan, and from If You're Listening, this is Black Swans. Our last episode was about housing and how the Australian dream of owning a detached house on a quarter-acre block has become impossible for most young people to achieve. One solution for solving the housing crisis was improving our nation's transport. Because really, housing is only unaffordable in certain places, of course. If you jump on a real estate website and look up property prices in rural Australia, you can get a real nice house for a very reasonable price in Broken Hill, Stawell, Port Augusta and Kempsey. The problem is, of course, oh, crucky, Kempsey's gone off, hasn't it? Wow, okay, maybe not Kempsey anymore. But in the case of the others, it's not too bad. That being said, of course, by moving there, you're almost certain to have to take a pay cut. Median incomes are much lower in rural towns. In some, they're barely above the national minimum wage. In Sydney, you're going to make twice that. But then again, of course, your house is going to cost 3 times that. The key problem is that you can't have the best of both worlds. You can't work in the city but live in the country, unless you want to spend half your life commuting. And yet, according to these letters that we found inside the ABC archive, they thought that we'd be moving a hell of a lot faster by now.
But you all commute daily and hourly so fast through space in your private flying saucers, spaceships, time and space equalizers, or whatever you may call them. But of course you can go to any point in our old world in a matter of minutes.
Rowan Rivet was one of 20 people who were asked by the ABC in 1959 to write letters to the unborn, messages to people living in the future, messages to us right here and now. They were fascinated by how we might be getting around.
I wish you could get through to us somehow and tell us whether the future of travel is going to be worth waiting up for.
Organist John Horner thought that by now we might not need to travel. We would just experience the world through technology.
Is your TV so good there now that you no longer need to travel at all? You simply press a button and there's the place of your choice on the screen before you in natural colours, with natural smells and breezes added out of an effects box.
Max Lamshed was stunned by the incredible increases in travel speed that he'd witnessed in his lifetime.
For hundreds of years, the speed of man's mobility was governed by his own movements or the metabolism of the horse. Its limit was 30 miles an hour or less. Then, soon after the dawn of the 20th century, came the motor car, and with a generation he could be transported at 200 miles an hour.
But we didn't stop there.
Then in half a century, 1,000 miles an hour. Wheel it all in. And now we see man-controlled rocket propulsion just around the corner with 2,000 miles an hour.
In 1959, the land speed record was 634 kilometres per hour and the airspeed record was 2,300 kilometres per hour. Max thought that speeds like this would become the norm.
The possibility of leaving Adelaide, fulfilling a luncheon engagement in London or attending the theatre or the opera, say, and being home again within 24 hours is no longer a fanciful dream. But it really does seem wonderful to us, though to you, as I said, it may be commonplace.
It's easy to see why they thought that air travel for the average person would get faster and faster. That's what had been happening their whole lifetime. This is an ad from the 1940s offering flights from Sydney to London, and look at all those stops. Your options were 2.5 days flying in a Lancastrian, a converted World War II bomber, or 5.5 days in a seaplane. The Lancastrian stopped to refuel 7 times, the seaplane stopped 12 times. The price? £500 return. That's about a third of the price of a house at the time. Totally inaccessible for most people. By 1959, when our letter writers were considering the future, a lot had changed, but
your great-great-grandmother and I aren't very happy about the marvels of modern air travel.
Speed had increased significantly, but the price hadn't really come down all that much.
They tell us what a wonderful thing it is that aeroplanes can now fly from Sydney to London in 48 hours. But the dreadful thing about it, as far as your great-great-grandmother and I are concerned, is that we can't.
Flying to London still cost more than half a year's salary. Why? Well, airline economics is obviously very complicated, but it basically comes down to the resources needed to haul all these people across the globe. In 1959, Qantas's flagship fleet of jets each carried 120 passengers. So to fly to London, you and 119 other people had to share the cost of, for a start, 135 tonnes of aviation fuel. Yes, that is more than 1 tonne of fuel per passenger, which is why, as elegant as a jet can look in an airline ad, when you actually stand right under one, whoa, they are really, really loud. And you remember that it really is just dragging itself up there on the back of an absolute buttload of kerosene. On top of the fuel, there's the people that you need to get the plane from A to B. You have to pay at least 3 pilots and half a dozen flight attendants for 48 hours. Plus, if you have to stop at least 6 times for refuelling, that means 8 sets of ground staff. Fuel and staff are by far the 2 biggest costs for airlines. There are obvious ways to cut those costs, though. Carry more people, fly faster, and make the planes more fuel efficient. A development in any of these areas would make flying cheaper and more accessible to regular people. Most people, including the Qantas chair back then, the tremendously named Sir Hudson Fysh, thought that higher speed was going to come first.
The 707 represents the intermediate step to the supersonic liners of the 1970s. San Francisco will be reached in 3.5 hours flying time and London in only 7 hours.
Supersonic in the 1970s. Invent a plane that could safely speed through the sound barrier and you could be in London in 7 hours. In 1962, Britain and France started the process of designing what would become known as the Concorde.
In today's high-pressure world, speed is comfort. Speed is time saved. Speed means business, and Concorde delivers speed.
So, speed first, then capacity and efficiency. But wait, what's that in the sky?
Apart from aircraft makers, no one was expecting the Superjet. Supersonics were the planes of the future.
It's a black swan.
Now they're preparing for the Superjet, the Jumbo, the Boeing 747.
In 1969, the Boeing 747 took off for the first time. That's 10 years after Dr. Van Abbe was griping that only rich people got to travel. The 747 wasn't any faster than the previous generation of jets, but it was much, much bigger.
The Jumbo is roughly equivalent to 3 Boeing 707s. On international flights, it can carry 450 people.
Its enormous size meant it could carry more fuel, and that meant that it could get from Sydney to London with only one stop to fill up.
The Superjet is the economy plane for every man. Plane in the 70s that will offer the most economical, swiftest, the strongest, the safest transportation for the peoples of the world.
When fully booked, the plane was quite economical. In 1971, Qantas started offering $700 return flights to London, 9 weeks average salary, down from 31 weeks in 1959. There was no way that Concorde was going to be able to compete with that price. This was really unexpected. A flying ocean liner was not at all what people in Dr. Van Abbe's day thought was coming next. They were waiting for supersonic jets. And the 747 didn't immediately change that expectation. Even Boeing was expecting supersonic jets to make their very, very large boy obsolete. They designed the 747 for easy conversion into a cargo jet once Concorde arrived.
The world's cities will be linked at new speeds. Athens will become a neighbour of New York and Tokyo. Australia will lose its isolation.
But creating a supersonic jet was an incredibly complicated engineering project, one that Boeing gave up on after spending $2 billion on research.
This is the mock-up of the American SST, grounded permanently by combined economic and ecological opposition. It, too, promised to be a triumph of technology. Now, it's just a storage problem.
Planes really don't want to fly faster than the speed of sound. As you approach Mach 1, the atmospheric drag increases dramatically and tries to slow the plane back down. Concorde's engineers developed an incredibly high-tech dart-shaped plane with 4 massive engines which could push past the sound barrier and reach speeds of Mach 2, twice the speed of sound. At high speed, the design worked really, really well.
One hardly feels the aircraft going through the sound barrier. It's quite smooth, hardly any different from any other flight one would take.
That she is a very normal aircraft and not at all kinky.
Concorde is not kinky. Got it.
She's a magnificent plane. I believe that she has a tremendous future.
002, clear takeoff, 230, 7 knots.
But while a dart is a great shape for high-speed flight, it's not a great shape for actually getting off the ground.
3, 2, 1, 201.8.
In these videos of Concorde's prototype taking off, you can see a thick trail of exhaust billowing from its engines as it leaves the ground. The plane had to use afterburners, squirting extra fuel into the exhaust of the engines in order to create enough thrust to get airborne. While taking off, it consumed 32.5 litres of fuel every second, a colossal amount. Throughout its trip, it burned 5 times more fuel per passenger than a fully loaded jumbo jet. But that was okay, because At the time, fuel was quite cheap. In fact, fuel had been cheap for decades. And this reliability shaped the way most people at the time thought about the future. It was a key driver behind so many decisions that still affect our lives today.
Australia has become one of the most motorised countries in the world. 1 in every 4 Australian owns a car. Many, in fact, own 2 vehicles.
This sudden influx of cars meant that cities had to be redesigned to accommodate the increasing traffic demand.
This elevated expressway is one idea to get Sydney's traffic moving.
But it wasn't that people just spontaneously decided one day to go out and buy one of these cars. There were a lot of different forces steering this change to city infrastructure from behind the scenes.
Try to imagine what this country would be like without automobiles.
From World War II onwards, the American auto industry did their best to portray cars as the only truly modern form of transportation.
There's nothing like a car.
As car ownership increased, trams and cars started getting in each other's way. After all, most tram networks just ran straight down the middle of the street. In the US, the auto giant General Motors just started buying up the tram systems and ripping them out.
They tried to buy out large networks of trams and dismantle them on purpose.
There is a little bit of debate about how widespread this was, but GM was accused of orchestrating a conspiracy to destroy tram networks.
A number of companies, including car companies, were actually collaborating and colluding, if you like, to essentially dismantle public transport.
They needn't have bothered. They were being ripped out all over the world, with or without the help of the big auto companies. GM certainly didn't force Sydney to rip out its tram lines.
There was cheap oil, and petrol became the dominant mode of fuel to drive vehicles.
By the 1970s, this is what was fueling the transport industry. It's about 90% oil. Electricity in trams and trains was down to like 0.5%.
The car was seen as a form of freedom, and building more roads was not only to accommodate transport and travel, it was seen as a form of modernity.
Melbourne's tram network had become the largest in the Western world, not because of expansion, but because every other large Western city burned or scrapped their trams. Today, present Melburnians are rightfully very proud of past Melburnians' decision to keep the tram network, though it was a decision that was by no means unanimous.
I think they clutter up the roadway and they're sort of a hazard.
In the 1960s, many Melburnians wanted their city to follow the rest of the country and rip out the trams.
Well, I think they're past their usefulness now. They're out of date. They want to do something a bit more modern.
But Sir Robert Risson, the chairman of the Tramways Board, said he wasn't all that interested in their opinions.
They're the people who never use them. They're the least qualified to speak. All the objections, I think without exception, come from the people who very rarely, if ever, use them. They're not qualified to speak in that respect, and yet, if they stop sensibly to think, they're the people, perhaps more than almost anyone else, who should be anxious to see the trams remain. Do away with the trams and you'll have more and more people trying to drive their private motor cars.
It was really a matter of timing. Sir Robert was sure that if they just held the line long enough, everyone would come around to his point of view. Experts were beginning to realise that solving traffic problems wasn't as simple as increasing the capacity of the road network.
Australian cities suffer from sprawl. The appetite for roads of car users is absolutely unfathomable. It just goes on and on. If you build a superhighway, it fills with cars.
Building more roads did not equal reducing congestion. It meant actually more travel.
In Sydney, 2 extra traffic lanes had been opened up on the Harbour Bridge by removing the tram lines. They were almost immediately full of traffic, and it took just as long to cross the bridge as it had before. By 1970, every tram network but Melbourne's was gone. But by 1972, even the strongest sceptics were beginning to change their mind.
The public a few years ago were like me. We had doubts about trams, but
My doubts have been resolved the more I've studied the role of trams.
And yet Melbourne continued to see a steady decline in usage across all forms of public transport throughout the 70s. The tram network was running at a significant annual loss.
Why do you think they're losing so much money?
Because of that evil, polluting monster, the motor car. I think if they only got rid of the motor car, particularly from the centre of the city, then the trams would have a fair go.
The ABC took journalist Keith Dunstan and TV personality Noel Ferrier out for a ride on the trams to see if they could come up with ideas for making them more attractive to Melburnians.
They should be beautifully plush inside, perhaps all leather like the Melbourne Club. And there should be a bar with whisky and beer being served and perhaps even nice little light meals down either end.
That is genuinely an amazing idea, Keith. I love it. Noel, what have you got?
Having seen some of the very charming young conductresses that are now working on the Melbourne trams, I think perhaps a leaf out of Yelke's book and pop them into gold leotards to add a little more attraction, a little more colour, perhaps to the tram life.
OK. Thank you very much for your input, Noel. But then...
3 out of 4 stations were closed. 99 out of 100 will be closed tomorrow.
Tonight I want to have an unpleasant talk with you about a problem that's unprecedented in our history.
In 1973, the Arab oil-producing states briefly cut off supply to countries which supported Israel. While the oil embargo was short, only 6 months long, its effects were massive.
Yes, look, I wonder whether you can fill it up, or is that impossible now?
Suddenly, the 70s, we had the oil shocks.
Oil had been cheap for essentially the entire first half of the 20th century. It was an abundant, reliable, densely packed bundle of energy. But then, in the mid-70s, the global price of oil, which had been stable for decades, suddenly went up by 650%.
That just sent a wave of disruption through the industry.
Petrol finds its way into the tanks of New South Wales motorists at around 17 cents per litre.
OK, so that doesn't sound like a lot to our modern ears, to be fair, but it was enough to change people's attitudes towards oil as a fuel.
People realized, and governments, that we can no longer depend on cheap fuel for our transport.
This was the global transport industry's largest black swan event. The world had been redesigned around that. The idea that oil was reliably cheap and could power our cars, buses, supersonic airliners and shipping.
Unless profound changes are made to lower oil consumption, we now believe that early in the 1980s, the world will be demanding more oil than it can produce.
For Concorde, this was catastrophic.
Concorde can fly from Sydney to London in 15.5 hours, about half the time for a Boeing Jumbo, but at 3 times the fare.
3 times the first-class fare, that is. Concorde's manufacturers were hoping that the price difference wouldn't matter.
We're offering a better product. You fly by airplane from A to B to get to B as fast as possible, for no other reason. This airplane will get you there in half the time. It's a better product. It will command a higher price.
The market didn't agree.
There's more enthusiasm for filling cheaper seats than for introducing dearer, though faster ones.
The dream of faster travel was slipping away.
So in the 50s and 60s, the future was imagined as very fast modes of transport that can travel very long distances at high speeds. And the Concorde was an example of that dream. The technology surprisingly failed, not because the technology was not good, it was because it was expensive, it was polluting, and also it was very noisy.
When Concorde was finally grounded permanently in 2003, a return ticket across the Atlantic Ocean would cost you around $12,000 compared with $9,000 for a first-class seat on a jumbo and $750 for economy. Most people who could afford it were happy with the first-class seat. Its failure was another black swan event. Everyone, from experts in the industry to the letter writers of Adelaide, thought that by now all international passenger transport would take place on dart-shaped, non-kinky supersonic aircraft. And the reason it never happened is fuel. We never managed to invent
your atomic aeroplanes and your time and space machines.
When our letters to the unborn were written in 1959, flights were getting faster and faster. They had seen the flight time to London decrease from 12 to 2 days in 15 years, and they assumed that would keep happening. But it didn't. Black swans got in the way. The interesting thing is, after the Black Swan event changed the trajectory of travel, people adjusted and assumed that the new trajectory would continue. As you saw on that giant graph, you can't rely on cheap fuel forever. Fuel becoming more expensive had a huge impact on the way people get around. So governments started investing in public transport again. In other words, they tried very hard to unburn all those trams.
We've got to think about not only phasing cars out of the city centre, but bringing back light rail, bringing back trams and trolley buses.
It led to more investment in renewable energy. It led to looking at vehicles and emissions and putting standards in place to try to reduce their emissions. And that actually started to work.
Cars became more efficient, but not less popular. People didn't really want to go back to public transport.
Oh, come off it. Buses and trams and trains that are dirty and slow and uncomfortable.
In the midst of the oil shocks, the South Australian Transport Authority actually produced a film trying to encourage people to use more public transport. The film included animated sections of what the future of public transport might look like.
A personalised rapid transit is a system which provides vehicles for single passengers or for small groups of up to 6, which move automatically along a network of guideways, taking the passengers directly from any station to any station in the system without stopping.
They were discussing this hypothetical system as a way of combining the convenience and privacy of cars with the speed and efficiency of public transport.
Perhaps it's one possible solution to the problem of giving our cities a chance to be the kind of places people want them to be.
This film was made 50 years ago, and in the intervening 50 years there have been countless attempts to make that personalised rapid transit system a reality.
They can be ordered like taxis for individual journeys to the village or the city.
They hope to make this next generation transportation a reality by 2025.
Elon Musk is attempting to figure out ways of turning his self-driving Teslas into personalised rapid transit cars by building tunnels under American cities.
Using tunnels, you can essentially create like a wormhole, like a warp tunnel from one part of a city to another. And we've actually already done this proof of concept in Vegas. It feels like teleporting from one part of Vegas to another.
So does a train, Elon. We've spent decades dreaming about these little pods instead of just building trains. Right now, I'm filming this episode in Sydney. After we're done, I'm going to catch the train home to Newcastle. The train's going to take about 2.5 hours, travelling at an average of 66 kilometres per hour. When our letter writers were putting pen to paper more than 6 decades ago, and the route was operated by steam trains, that same trip could be completed in less than 2 hours at more than 80 kilometres per hour.
Australia is a very large country, and even Sydney to Melbourne or Sydney to Brisbane, these are very expensive projects. But I think there is no denying that high-speed rail is going to come on top, and a lot of countries around the world are investing in it. The more we delay it, the more expensive it will become.
All of this is not just a rant about the decades-long destruction of public transport. This series is about predicting the future. Nobody thought in the 1950s that by now we would only have made tiny incremental steps towards higher speed transport. Getting around isn't all that much easier now than it was back then. Maybe they shouldn't have set fire to all those trams. Now, all of this seems a bit grim, really. And when I tell you what the topic of the next episode is, it might sound like it's going to be even grimmer. But I think you might be surprised. After all, people have been predicting the end of the world for a while, and we're still here. Hopefully we will still be here for the next episode. I'll see you then.